Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the 8th session in our What Happens When You Give teaching series. And today I'm going to be talking about our Vision Builders Capital campaign. But before I do, I want to take some time to thank you all for your participation and support of this What Happens When You Give series. The last 3 videos from the previous 3 weeks, I recorded them about a month ago in one setting. And since then, I wanted to let you know that because numbers of people have commenced a lifestyle of tithing, have taken the teaching on board, or have increased their consistent giving up to a level of tithing, we have seen an improvement, an increase in our regular weekly giving. And I wanted to take some time to thank you for that. Numbers of people have gotten on board with that. And I want to encourage you, if you're not yet tithing, to step out in faith, trust God, make that move towards tithing, or at least starting somewhere and beginning to increment until you can get to that point of tithing 10%. Together, as we do that, we're going to see our vision expand, and we're going to have more resource to be able to do all that God has called us to do. So if you're fairly new to our church, you might not even know what our Vision Builders campaign is. It's our annual funding campaign where we encourage every person to make a commitment to set aside some amount of money, either weekly or fortnightly, or some people even do it in a lump sum if they're expecting a lump sum payment. And we set that aside for the purpose of giving to Vision Builders so that it can be used for capital expenses. That's rents and buildings related things and costs that we have within our building and so on. And we do this over and above our regular commitment to tithing. And if you're not a part of doing that yet, it's not too late. You don't even have to wait until February next year for our next campaign. You can simply come and chat with me or read the email that will come out tomorrow with this video, and you'll be able to contribute something towards Vision Builders. You can either begin to start a weekly commitment, or you can just put a one-off payment in, and it will be used for those purposes, for those facilities-related purposes. In the previous 3 videos in this series, I spoke about tithing and showed how important tithing is, that it transfers into the New Testament. And last week in particular, I talked about how the Jewish people were required to bring 3 tithes. But none of those 3 tithes were actually ever used for the purpose of facilities and maintenance and building. They were always, in the Old Testament, funded through external separate campaigns that were apart from the tithe. And so just to give you a quick overview of a couple of those, when Moses brought the Israelites out of Egypt and they were living in the desert and it was time for them to build God's house, the tabernacle, they were required to bring a special offering, a special capital campaign where they brought resources that could be used for the building of God's tabernacle. That was not part of a tithe, it was over and above. And then when it came time for the people of Israel as a nation to transfer from a tabernacle to a temple, build a temple for God, King David initiated a capital giving campaign, and he gave himself financially to that. That's why I'm committed to Vision Builders. We as leaders are committed to Vision Builders. We expect that our leaders will contribute to that. David contributed, then he asked others to contribute, and they did as well. And then he went to the general populace and said, we want you guys to contribute something. And together they built a temple for God. And then throughout the history of the temple period, there were times when the temple would fall into disrepair and would need maintenance and repair and improvements. And they were funded out of special offerings. We want to be freely giving so that our buildings and facilities are at the top level and bring honor to God and are a place where our new people can come and where our families can call their spiritual home. When we get to the New Testament, we don't actually see any capital funding campaigns in the New Testament. And the reason for that is quite simple, because they didn't have any church buildings in the New Testament. When the church in the first century was very persecuted, and it was built in houses, and it was being heavily persecuted by the Jews and then by the Romans, they didn't have time to establish buildings and facilities where they could worship God. And so they didn't have this issue. That's why we don't see it mentioned. But it's not long into the history of the church that we do see church buildings coming into play. And then throughout church history, for the last couple of thousand years, there has always been capital funding campaigns that have been intended and used for the purpose of church buildings and facilities. Most notable of these, of course, is the great cathedrals in medieval Europe, where people were contributing financially over and above their regular giving for the purpose of building facilities that would be lasting into generations to come. And Vision Builders is really about that. It's about thinking generationally. It's thinking about how can we take what we have and invest it into the next generation so that we can bring honor to God and see the purpose of God fulfilled in our children and our children's children. So I want to just take a moment now and explain what's been done so far up to date with vision builders in our campus. So here at Camden, we moved into this Spring Farm school about just over 12 months ago after about 5 years in Camden Public School. Now that served us great in the first 5 years, but we are so encouraged by this new facility. There are so many benefits to this new building. We have a great relationship with the school community. We have on-site storage. Everyone said, yes, that's fantastic. For 5 years, if you weren't with us during that time, you may not know that we had to pack up and set up everything every day, every Sunday, take it away in a trailer and the back of people's cars and store it off-site. No on-site storage. It's been a great godsend to be able to have an on-site storage designated room. We didn't even have on-site kids ministry before. Now we've got a wonderful designated room we can use every Sunday. We've got another room that's available for our youth meetings. And so we've been incredibly encouraged by this new building. And so some of the things that we've been able to do because we've had on-site storage is we've been able to install our own projection and lighting system. So the projection system that you're watching this video on now in church is actually installed by us for the benefit of the school as well. They can use it, but we have paid for that through our Vision Builders campaign. The lighting racks are all, the lights on the lighting racks are all ours. We've been able to overhaul our sound system because we're in a temporary permanent facility now, and we have been able to put up new dividing screens around the auditorium to create the sense of space. We've had new furniture in our foyer and our cafe area. And I've had guest speakers come during the last 12 months who visit a lot of churches, a lot of temporary churches, and they say we are at the cutting edge of doing mobile church really well. And that's a real encouragement, and that's an honor to you guys as you've given towards that. It means that we can have this sort of semi-mobile option because we can leave some of our things permanently set up, and everything else is easy to wheel in and wheel out. The other thing we've been able to do this year, and those of you who endured last year's summer will be glad to hear it, we've installed air conditioners with our Vision Builders money into the auditorium. Now that's a benefit to the school kids, obviously, and it's also going to be a benefit to us as we head into the summer months. And that's come through Vision Builders commitment. So as we move into 2018, there's some things we'll tell you about in February that we're believing God for with regard to facilities. But I believe that we can enter into a season where we can begin to set aside money for future plans for buildings and facilities. We want to spend a little bit of money on increasing the level of mobile facility for our kids and youth so that they can have a greater level of professionalism, a place where they really would want to invite their friends along to within the school. And then beyond that, we want to be able to begin to replicate our services and have multiple services across a Sunday. And that will require extra rent, obviously, because we'll be renting the facility for more, and we'll need Vision Builders money to help us pay that additional rent each week. But the good news that I see for that is that we are so well set up in this school that we can be here for numbers of years to come and have a church that's 3 or even 4 times the size we currently are within this school community. We're in a growing area with a growing school, and we don't even need to be thinking about our own facility yet, which means that we can begin to say that, yes, it'll cost us extra money in rent, but compared to what we would pay for a 24/7 facility, we should be able to save money and put it in the bank and begin to look towards what God calls us for in the next phase of our journey, whether that's future buildings or future outreaches into other communities. We'll be able to look towards the future plans for the kingdom of God. And to me, that's what Vision Builders is all about, really. We are setting ourselves up to do church well now, but then we're in a position where we can begin to think generationally for what God has in store for us in the days ahead. So what can you do to play your part in Vision Builders? Well, the first thing I would say is if you're not tithing, start there. Before we concern ourselves with Vision Builders, I think we need to be honouring the tithe. And so I'd encourage you, those of you who aren't yet tithing, to begin tithing. Either make that commitment and say, I'm going to put aside 10% of my income and give it to God, 10% of my gross income, or I'm going to begin somewhere and then begin to increment towards tithing. And numbers of you have done that, and I would encourage you, it's been a couple of months, might be time to go up another couple of percent, increase that so that within 12, 18 months you're at a point where you are tithing, and then you can begin to look towards Vision Builders beyond that. If you have made commitments, we're heading towards the end of this year, I would encourage you to step out in faith. We were counting on those commitments for our Vision Builders. We would ask you to make those commitments, finish what you started, as it were, and you've got a few months to do that, to actually step in and fulfill those commitments. If you haven't made a commitment, either because you're new or you didn't make a commitment, it's not too late. You can still do something between now and Christmas. And fourthly, perhaps you could sell something. If you've got something around your house that you're not using, that's not being practical, maybe it's in the way, you could sell that thing on eBay and then donate the proceeds, the sale of that, to Vision Builders. So it becomes a win-win. You're investing into the next generation and you're also getting some stuff out of your way that otherwise would have been in the way. And lastly, in February, we're going to launch our 2018 campaign. And next year, we're going to run it in 2 6-monthly phases. So we'll be asking people to commit to an amount for 6 months, and then we'll reboot it mid-year for the remaining 6 months of the year. And I'm really excited about next year's campaign because I believe that we're going to be at a point by this time next year where we have kind of essentially finished off most of the things that we need to do in our current buildings, and we'll be setting aside money for future, whether that is future buildings or future church plants or locations and the facilities that are needed for those. That's going to be an exciting time, and it's all because all of us together are playing our part. So God bless you. Thank you for your Vision Builders giving. Together, we're making a difference.